And that's it for me. I'm going to turn this over to Harold Shapiro, who is the department head of our photography department at Creative Arts Workshop in New Haven. And he is offering Nurturing Nature this evening. Harold, over to you.
Welcome, everyone. It's so great to see you and familiar faces and some new faces. So I hope that you're doing well in these challenging times. These strange events that have occurred in our lives are something that has driven me to find nature photography again and be really enjoying that so much, finding a lot of peace through that. So that's kind of the impetus of what started the idea for this class tonight. So going on nature walks and finding beauty even locally has been great. I grew up with photography, seeing amazing photographers from, out in the Midwest and in Europe and across the world. And I thought, well, you can't really compete with that if one doesn't travel. But I've changed my mind. So I believe locally we have a lot of beauty. We can find things in our backyard, nearby. Nature preserves are everywhere. So that's what I'm going to encourage everyone to start looking at. After we review some of the photographs, I want to tell you a little bit about a project that I'm working on personally called Crisis Creativity, which has two aspects to it. One aspect is that I am posting every day on Facebook these photographs and stories about the photographs. And also I am doing flutograms. I'm playing my flute for people that my wife and I know, or people that have seen this on Facebook, or people have been recommended to it. And I've done nearly 60 little concerts for people in these last several weeks. So trying to connect is kind of what I'm doing with all of this. So that's why I'm glad that we're all here tonight. I'm going to start sharing the screen now, and you'll soon start to see some pictures. So now we see two photographs at once. Normally, I would be showing one at a time. We're just having a little issue with Zoom. When I don't initiate it, I can't really get a single picture up at one time. So we'll just have to see the two at once. So let's start with Carol's photograph, Cloudscape, which is really quite beautiful. And clouds are something that I think we all grow up loving and really enjoying seeing. I remember being a small child on our farm and really being captivated with clouds. They're just gorgeous. They mean a lot in terms of their mood to many people. They affect our lives. When we're in a plane, they're a whole nother thing. I'm sure you've been in planes and enjoyed watching the clouds change and being in the clouds and above the clouds, but being below the clouds is what we're used to seeing. I had a wonderful photography teacher in 1980. Sadly, he's passed away, Tom Pettit. And I was doing some photographs of clouds, and he said, I actually asked him, I said, is this something that one can do, can take pictures of just the clouds? And he actually said no, but I actually don't agree with that. He was a wonderful photographer and teacher, but that's something I don't really agree with, because I think that one could make a beautiful series of photographs of clouds, and it could be something that could be shareable and viewable, and something that could have some power. So let me tell you some things about photography and about how I'm going to talk about the photographs tonight, because I don't want anyone to feel left out or insulted or upset about anything really, because that's not what this is about. So this is not a competition. There's no winners or losers. The photographs are all really beautiful. The having someone's picture being better than yours, if you think so, doesn't mean they're a better person or a better photographer. It just means maybe that picture just is hitting someone more. And that's an important thing. That's an important topic, because we all are influenced by our past and by our emotions about what captivates us and what is interesting to us in a photograph or in music, in theater, paintings. So everything in our past helps to illuminate what will be interesting to us. I'm sure you've all seen that when you say, oh, I love pictures of the moon, you know, and so even if it's not a perfect picture of the moon, you say, I still like it because it's the moon. And that's perfectly legitimate. Sometimes photographs go beyond subject matter and become universally really beautiful or interesting. And that's a really special thing when that happens. So the cloud picture is beautiful. Then we move over and we see the moon. So it says dark to pink supermoon. This is Amy's photograph. So the moon, when it's a full moon on a clear night, is a wonderful thing. And this is a fun photograph. And we have these leading lines that lead to the moon with the dark. So it's a very nice composition. The height of the moon is in a good place. So I really like that. So, and I always tell my students when I'm doing night photography classes that the moon is best to photograph before it's really, really dark out, because then you can get a good balance between the exposure of the moon and the surrounding scenery. Because rarely do we really just want a picture of just the moon, you know, and we certainly don't want it to be, you know, an overexposed ball of flames generally. So this is a nice start. These two photographs are beautiful. And now we have two more. And these are both by Janet. And we have two very different scenes. So we have a very nice New England scene on the left, with a stone wall. And stone walls are really fascinating. In the Northeast, if one grows up on a farm like I did, in the spring, we would go and pick rocks, actually. We'd have to pick rocks because the frost of the winter and the fall would push the rocks up and come close to the surface, and one could not plow the field until the rocks were picked. So that's where stone walls became very popular, because the rocks were being picked anyway. So then they would need to put the rock somewhere. So it's just kind of interesting to know that history. I just took a walk last week in Stony Creek, and it's a beautiful walk that's kind of a hidden place, and there were stone walls in every direction. I was stunned. I actually had never seen so many stone walls in my entire life. And it's worth a view to see that. It was a nice walk. So, and then we also have, in conjunction with the stone wall, we have some dilapidated farm equipment. And it's a nice combination of the two. Then we have a very different scene on the shoreline. So a beautiful shoreline scene, and with a bird flying, and that gives a very peaceful feeling, and the composition is nice. So there are some compositional elements I want to talk about. The photograph on the left, the diagonal of the stone wall is very attractive, and then the angle of the farm equipment going the opposite direction, kind of in line with the stone wall, is very, very peaceful feeling and nice compositionally. Usually, if possible, we try to avoid having horizon lines right in the center of the frame, just because it's so simple and so obvious that we really like to be getting away from that. So we use what's called the rule of thirds. I'm sure many of you have heard this rule before. The rule of thirds say that basically a frame, like a photograph, is divided in nine little sections, and you try to keep things out of the center and away from the horizon line. If a picture really, many pictures really something does belong in the center, so it's just absolutely fine. But sometimes it's like great to try it all different ways. So what I do, and what I suggest my students do, when you see a scene, take it the simple way first, and then spend some time and walk around and look around. And I often find that the first picture I took is perfectly fine, but when I explore it, I find something much more interesting on the side or behind me. So I'm kind of like Linda Blair in The Exorcist, spinning my head around, looking around and saying, is that really the best picture that I'm looking at now? And I have sometimes spent a good deal of time in the wrong spot. And then I walk away and I turn around or turn to the side and say, oh my God, look at that. That's really the picture that I should have been concentrating on. Has that ever happened to any of you? When you've seen something, you say, oh, look, that's the picture. There it is. So that's kind of fun. So it's nice. There's a figure here with a reflection in the water. Very nice. So these are two photographs by Kathy Fredericks. Kathy is actually one of my longest students that I've had. She's been with me since about 1985. So that's quite a while. So, so these are fun. The turkey pictures. Ghazi's turkey farm dyes their turkeys near Thanksgiving, and it's always a fun view. And then we see kind of a topical statement with the toilet paper and the forsythia. So, you know what? Photography can be a wonderful tool for communicating issues, current issues and past, and how you're feeling. We have some pictures coming up that express that as well. But the toilet paper and the forsythia, I think, is a really fun, whimsical idea. And it really is part of the story of our current existence. It's funny how toilet paper is still hard to find in the supermarket. So we see a very eerie but beautiful scene by Greg here. It almost looks apocalyptic to me, with these trees and sticking out in funny angles. And the black and white, I'm a big fan of black and white. I adore color photography as well, of course, but black and white is where most people started in the older days. And so it's a very nicely composed with a foreground, background, so really good. Then we have a picture by Astrid here, a beautiful picture in a fjord. And interestingly, without that little boat in the picture, it almost looks like the rocks are not that big. But because we have that boat, we say, oh, they're much bigger than they actually appear, at least for me at first glance. Was that true for you?
Yes, definitely.
Do you see the boat? So it's very nice. And you know, when you get to travel, it's wonderful to come back with images of scenes that are so different than what we see every day. So here's a photograph by Avril, beautiful scene, composed elegantly, and color-wise, there's a lot of color contrast, which I love. Actually, both pictures right next to each other. Renee's picture also, the colors of both of these pictures are working extraordinarily well. So colors communicate to each other in a painting or a photograph, and the interaction is quite powerful. So when we have opposites like the blue and the tan, the baby blue of the water and the sky with the tan of the rushes, it's a beautiful combination. And a little bit of red, a little bit of the green, kind of like icing on the cake. Then we see a very powerful color scene in Renee's photograph, and a very surprising amount of color in the photograph in the shape. It's quite interesting. Seems very ancient. It seems like a hobbit was about to jump out of there. So here's a photograph by Andrea, and I actually took her picture and I changed the color a little bit. It's not perfect, but so the photograph with the birdhouse and the trees, it's very nice. It felt a little too cold to me. The color balance was a little too chilly. And sometimes if we're not processing our pictures, we don't have that much control over that. But I have good news for you. If you even have, if you're just taking cell phone pictures, there are some wonderful apps to process your pictures and to brighten or darken or warm up or cool down the picture. And you can do beautiful processing even on cell phone pictures. So we see the first one is the original, and then we see the slightly warmed up version of it as well. So those are some of the changes that we can do in Photoshop or other programs. So I see processing of images the same way as like cooking a chicken. When we get the chicken home from the supermarket, it's pretty raw, it's cold, and it needs to be cooked, right? We need to spice it up. The same is true with photographs. And Ansel Adams said a wonderful thing. Of course, this was before digital. It was with film and printing in the darkroom. He said the negative is the score, the print is the performance. And I really love that because it gives the importance of the printing or the output, the sharing of the image, as equally important as the taking of the photograph. So now we have two very different pictures on the screen. So we see a picture by Bob, and Bob has a really good sense of processing, and he milks the color and gets really rich colors and contrasts, and his pictures are very sharp and instantly almost a graphic feel to them. So it's really quite nice. So that's done with some very careful processing. Then we see a photograph by Bill, and Bill said that this photograph and the one following, there's one more, they reflect how he felt as we went into this crisis time. And so that is something that I think is really important, is to use our art in a time like this to speak with how we are feeling and how other people are feeling, and it's good to document that. One day, my wife and I were walking, and we saw early on people, when they had gloves, they were just throwing their rubber gloves everywhere. They were on the ground. I'm sure some of you saw those around. So I photographed some gloves, and I put them in a composite photograph with some flying birds, because the gloves kind of reminded me of the birds. So if we have time, I'll show you that a little bit later. So here's another picture by Bill with, it just is not a happy day. And, you can see the feeling that's coming through, and it expresses kind of a feeling of not happy. then we see Susan's picture, which is kind of the opposite. And it's a beautiful, beautiful sunflower with a nice bee doing its thing. And we're so happy when we can see nature actually working this way, because we're all worried about our bees and all of that. So when we see a bee, and it's like, thank heaven for nature working and doing its job. But the composition is very nice because the sunflower almost feels like the sun, like really bursting, because there's some backlighting. The backlighting is up on top coming through the petals, and that's called transillumination, light coming through the petals, and it's really beautiful. So these are two photographs by Suzy, and she just went on a really big trip. She was in Thailand, and we see beautiful pictures. The elephant is great. I love how close she is to the elephant, and it appears with a slightly wide angle lens, so that you know that she was really close to it, like maybe a couple feet away from the trunk. So it's very dramatic, and the elephant in the rear gives it a nice dimension. There are two trees, though, sticking out of the elephant's head. So I don't know about you, but when I have a photograph like that, I get rid of those trees. So I have to be honest. I will be brutally vicious and get rid of those trees out of anyone's head, because that's a disturbing thing. But the photograph is beautiful, and with a little help like that, it could be really spectacular. The photograph on the right is a strange sea thing. I'm not really sure what it is. Maybe something related to a coral. I'm not sure. Suzy, do you know what that is?
Yes, I've since found out it's called Pandema, and it is an algae.
Oh,
in
so
Southeast Asia. Yeah.
It's beautiful, and the rippling light in the water is an optical effect that I think fascinated people from millennia ago. Recently, I did a workshop on the history of optics and lenses, and surprisingly, the history goes back to 750 BC. Because early people would see things like that rippling water and be fascinated by that and try to understand what was going on with that light, and what was the effect of the water acting really as a lens many, many generations before any understanding of lenses or optics really occurred. The interest in there was there. So for me, I'm always fascinated when I see a lighting effect like that. It's really beautiful. So Gale has a picture that's really fun and surprising. And so is Gale here tonight? So maybe not. So she says the photograph was taken in the Dordogne, that's in central France, a beautiful section. It's near where the Neanderthal caves are. It's a lovely area. I've actually been there, so I enjoyed being in such a beautiful place. But it's fun to see the odd juxtaposition. And Janine has a really subtle and lovely picture of a birch tree bark. The birch tree is always a surprising tree for me, because we're so used to trees mostly being dark, the bark on trees. So there's something really special about light trees, and it almost feels like it's skinning, like the skin coming off of a snake or something. And this is employing what's called shallow depth of field. So that means that the foreground is in focus and the background is quite out of focus. So shallow depth of field is a wonderful way to control what the photographer wants the viewer to really see and feel. So we're able to really almost physically feel the foreground, and the background, which is softer, it doesn't feel as tactile to me. So it's a nice combination. It's a very good technique. It's very popular. Some people love everything in picture being in focus, and some people prefer the other way. It's good to be open-minded, though, about that, because they're both beautiful ways and different ways to express ourselves photographically. So we have another photograph with extreme shallow depth of field by Keith, and it's very ethereal. And when I see a forest picture like this, I always think of the Lord of the Rings and elves, you know, going through the forest as silently as possible. And I feel like there's a story here that's a mysterious story that I don't know what the beginning or end is, but it's quite lovely. I'm a big fan of branches and trees, and there's a lot that one can do with these visually. So then Lisa has a picture here of some nice ducks, and ducks are so beautiful. So who here, by a raise of hands, who here has photographed ducks? The you know, ducks are, you know, are fun. And I live in Guilford, and we have a little river, I think it's called the East River, and there are lots of ducks, and they're fun to see. Here's a photograph by Victor. Very beautiful colors, and swamps are really interesting to me. There's nice reflection in the water. I just did a photograph with just a reflection that I'll show you shortly. My wife and I took a trip to a nature preserve in North Haven, and we got there, and it was, not only was the Merritt Parkway right next to it, but even the place where you can stop and get gas was right there at the entrance of the park. So it didn't feel very conducive to nature at the moment. And we almost left, but I saw a little path by the river, and as we were walking, it started to get more interesting and more beautiful every step we took. And it turned out that it had been a residential area at one point, but because of the river, it had became a flood problem. So all the houses were taken down, and now it's a nice nature park. So it's interesting how that can happen. And I started seeing the reflection in the water, and I was just mesmerized. And I said right away, I knew it was one of the most beautiful lyrical photographs I had ever taken, in a place that I had judged harshly as not being beautiful enough to even take a walk around. So it's good to stay open-minded and not be too judgmental in our thoughts and with people, and even with nature parks. So let me go back. So Nancy's picture, this looks like it's the Guilford Green, and it looks a little bit cool to me. I'm sorry they're not next to each other, but I also warmed this picture up just a little bit. So you can see it's just a little bit warmer on the bottom version. So I wonder what your opinion, which one do you like better? The first one or the second one? So one thing that you can do, I don't know, number 2? I see a number 2. I see some number 1s. And you know what? That's perfectly fine. We all have different opinions and also emotional feeling about colors. So that's an important thing to remember when we're dealing with color photography, is that color is very powerful and can really influence how we feel about and how we feel when we see an image. So some people really gravitate toward cooler colors, and some people gravitate toward warmer colors. So it's good to think about those things. We have a photograph by Gale, which is also backlit. We see the sun is in the far left side, and so it's making the sparkly trees really sparkle, which gives it a really nice feel. And again, that's where lighting can be so powerful in photographs. Because if the sun was behind her, we could imagine it would just not have that sparkly feel to it. So where the sun is, where we put a light, is hugely important to the feeling of what the image will be. So we have a couple more pictures of people that had already submitted pictures. So these are some additional ones. I wasn't sure if we'd have time to see them, but we do have time for some more. So let's take a look. And if you have any comments, you can write comments, you know, and Astrid will take a look at those. So if you have any questions, you know, we'd love to hear from you. If you have a really important question, feel free to unmute yourself, and you know, we can chat some. So let's go and we'll see a couple more pictures here. So these are also by Avril, and so these are really nice nature scenes. So here, the one on the left, there's those odd trees that the leaves stay on all winter. I don't really know what those are, but they're fascinating. And so here we have shallow depth of field, only the foreground is out of focus. So it's the opposite of what the picture was with the birch tree. So it's really interesting how that works. So it's different, it's a totally different feel. Then we see a little river scene, and it has a beautiful S-curve. And for some reason, S-curves are particularly attractive to people, and they're almost like universally approved of. Like everyone goes, ah, they're just very, very nice when you see an S-curve in a river. There's something about that. Here's a couple more. So this is a nice path, and this time of year, trees are so different in different seasons. Like a picture like this would be fun to see in all 4 seasons, with the trees with leaves and maybe with a little bit of snow. So that can be a fun project that people can do, is to take the same scene in different seasons. And what I do I love paths like this and boardwalks. I love boardwalks. I'm always taking pictures of them too. So I take a picture like this first, and then I try all sorts of different angles and get close to a tree and point up and point down and try different lenses or different focal lengths on my zoom lens. So this is a good place to start, and then to find other views that might be also interesting to you. So we have another picture, there are actually 2 by Janet, of this scene, of this strange topiary. So I think this one, we can see it a little bit better. So we see the topiary. Topiary is kind of like English bonsai. That's when those really manicured bushes are really amazing. And they almost look like organic, something other than what they are. So fascinating. So is Janet here tonight? So maybe not. So so a picture like this, when I see it, I really like the composition and everything. The contrast is a little bit low. So sometimes that's because the lens is can be a little dirty. And in processing, we could add a little contrast. We could darken it, and we can just give it a little more zip, darken the shadows some, and it could be really, really bring it to life.
Harold, I have a question.
Yes.
So the picture on the left with all the greenery, I noticed
Yes.
when previously when you had it on the right, it seemed that there might have been a thumb on the corner. And so I
Yes.
thought perhaps that was part of the reason why it threw off the focus.
Well, possibly. I'm not sure about that, but it's, you know, maybe the thumb is what dirtied the lens, you know. So we all have these little things that happen when we're taking pictures. So we've all made little mistakes and successes. So could be, but I think that you know, with a little help, the picture could be really, really perked up. So here's another picture by Kathy of these turkeys, and a little more abstract, closer up. So it's really different than the other one. The other one gave a wider view, and then so the act of moving in and getting close is very important. Many of you probably know the photographer Deanne Arbus, who's really one of my favorite photographers from the 50s and 60s. She was amazing and powerful photographer, and she would get in very, very close. And that has a huge impact on the way her pictures look. The closeness and the intimacy is quite incredible. So here's another photograph by Renee, who had the really interesting picture of the bottom of the tree trunk with the moss and growth on it. So I love the branches and everything, and the frog just sticking out its head. I love that. I wish it was a little bit sharper, but again, with a little bit of processing, it could be fixed up a little bit too. Could be a little more contrast and sharpening could help it enormously, because it's really a captivating image. Then we have one more by Suzy. This is at Silver Sands State Park, which is a really nice place, and it's really worth going to see. So that's in Milford, and that's about as far south as I've been heading lately. And so Milford, I've been going to West Haven, New Haven, and then all the way, I've been to like Old Saybrook in that direction too, finding these nature preserves. So it's really worth trying some of these nature preserves. If you have any favorite nature parks or walks, it would be great if you could tell us all, you know. So does anyone have a favorite spot that they like to walk?
Yes, the Branford Land Trust in Branford has a number of trails that are just amazing and great opportunity to photograph. There's one in Stony Creek that runs along the water and into the woods that's really great for photography. I think people would like that one. And then the
that's
quarry
great.
area is another great area.
Those are perfect suggestions, and they're easy to get to, and it's just so serene in these places, and people are nice. There's the place in Branford where the people get to walk the dogs, and their dogs are all running around off leash. That's really fun.
That's
The trolley trail.
What was that?
I think you're talking about the trolley trail. It's straight and it goes across the bridge and then it goes through the marsh. And then you could see the osprey nest.
Yes. I was there just yesterday.
Also, there's the supply pond, which
That's what I was thinking about. Yes, the supply. Thank you, Bob. The supply pond is spectacular for walking, and it's fun with all the dogs running around.
I would also say two of my favorite places are Cockaponset, the pond and the area all around Cockaponset is in my backyard, so I'm there all the time. And then Timberland Preserve, I've discovered in the last couple of years in Guilford, is phenomenal as well.
Yeah, I haven't been there yet, but that's on my list. I'm trying to make a list of all the places because they're fascinating and they're all so different. Some are really rocky, some are trees, some have steep climbs, and most are pretty flat. I'm stunned by the variety and the diversity of terrain, and that makes it really quite fun to go discover these new places. So I really encourage you to all try some new places.
Harold, there are some questions that people have asked. Are you ready for those now?
Yes.
Okay. So hang on one second. This is a question from Lisa. She says, I've tried to photograph the moon and the light always seems to bleed to make a blurry shape. What do you do exposure-wise to contain the light within the moon shape?
Yes, so great question. So the moon, surprisingly, on a clear night, especially a full moon, is as bright as Earth is in the middle of the day. So as I said earlier, if we start taking pictures of the moon after it gets dark, unless we have a very specialized camera and a quite telephoto lens, you're going to end up with a black mass of sky and a blurry, overexposed moon. So iPhones are very difficult, cell phones are difficult to photograph the moon while it's really dark. So getting out early is really important. With a good camera, I mean a real digital single lens reflex or a mirrorless camera with a telephoto lens, what we do is we really do a pretty fast exposure on the moon. The moon needs an exposure of like 1/25th or 60th of a second. If we start photographing the moon when it's really dark and we're at 1 second or 2 seconds, then the moon turns into a blurry mess. And also the Earth's movement really makes it come out less good. So we really want faster exposures, and using a tripod is great, especially if you're using a telephoto lens. So I always have a tripod and I use a cable release and I do mirror lockup. So I know some of this is stuff that many of you haven't heard before, but those are the things that one does to try to keep things really sharp.
What was that lockup, Harold?
So mirror lockup. So if you have a single lens reflex, a digital or a film single lens reflex, when the mirror pops up, it shakes the camera. So if we have a fast shutter speed of 200th of a second or higher, that mirror shaking does not affect the sharpness of the image. But when we get lower than 60th of a second, it has a huge impact on the sharpness. even if the camera's on a solid tripod, if we lock the mirror up, it's up, then we wait a second or two, then we open the shutter and release, and then the shutter closes without the mirror moving it. So that makes for a sharper image generally.
And with mirrorless, you don't have that problem, I gather.
Right, so mirrorless have some really big advantages, and they are taking off like crazy. So Sony led the way with these mirrorless cameras, and Nikon and Canon are hitting back hard, and it's very exciting. The Canon supposedly is coming out with a camera that's in the 70 megapixel range this summer, but we'll have to see. Those are the rumors, that it's a very high resolution camera. So that's exciting to me, because the higher resolution, then the sharper the images really end up being. Although, to be honest, once cameras got over 8 and 10 megapixel, the difference between 10 and 20 megapixel, believe it or not, is not extraordinarily high. So even I have a 30 megapixel Canon, and so even going from 30 megapixel to 50 or 70 is only about a 5 or 10% increase in sharpness. But that can make a big difference if one is making enlargements. Are there any other questions?
Yep, there's 3 more. Andrea wants to know, she says, I've been taking photos on my cell phone, but have an old Canon Rebel 2000. Can you recommend a nice starter?
Yeah, so so Canon has done an extraordinarily good job of making similar cameras to that Rebel that are digital, and they're very affordable and excellent cameras. And I've had students make 30 by 40 inch prints from those cameras that look spectacular, and they don't look any different from my much more expensive camera, actually. So the digital Rebel line is extensive, and there's several models because they come out with a new one every year or so. So take a look at the digital Rebels, and I think you'll be surprised. I mean, you can certainly in the $400 to $500 price range, you can get an excellent camera from both Nikon and Canon. Somehow I find the Canon beginner camera is a little bit easier to work with, but that's my personal opinion. I actually started with Nikons, and I loved my Nikons. So my Nikon film cameras I loved, and I went digital in 2003 with Nikon, but then I wasn't liking how they were looking, so I switched to Canon. But now they're both making beautiful cameras. What other questions, Astrid?
She also has a question. She says, thoughts on photo washing color to a black and white?
So converting to black and white is something that I do almost every day, especially right now because I'm really enjoying some of my free time by creating some odd images. So if you have a program like Photoshop, there are about 50 different ways to convert an image to black and white from color. And what you want to choose is one that gives you the most control as possible. So when they give you different channels of color, I know that's a little confusing, but when you can actually adjust the red, the blue, the green, when you can adjust the colors, then that control is giving you a lot of power in how the image will end up looking. So in Photoshop, which you can download a free trial for a month, it will give you a filter that, well, it's not exactly a filter, it's a layer. In Photoshop, we work with layers, and that layer is very malleable, so you have a lot of choices with how it will look.
And then Leon wants to know about the lighting that you used for your setup. You said it's very soft and pleasant. So what
So
did you
my
do?
setup right now,
Mm-hmm.
so actually, about 5 minutes before we started, the light that I had on in here burnt out. So I had to run downstairs to my basement. So this is a light that a friend of mine from photography school actually gave me when he retired, and it's bouncing off the ceiling. And so I have a light over there bouncing off the ceiling. I have kind of a cathedral ceiling in this room. And so the bounce is similar to what I would do almost in a portrait setting. So that's what I was going for with this, was to have kind of a portrait lighting look. And as I mentioned earlier, I've been doing these flutograms, and this is also my flutogram studio. So it's becoming a photo lesson studio and a flutogram studio.
Mm-hmm.
So very useful.
Harold, I saw those on the Creative Art Workshop site. They're beautiful, absolutely beautiful.
So I'm sorry, what were you saying?
I saw those flutograms, I think, with all the instruments and so forth on the Creative Art Workshop website. It's beautiful, beautiful.
Thanks so much. So what he's referring to is my photographs that are on exhibit at Creative Arts right now, called Luminous Instruments. So in 1980, I started taking pictures of musical instruments. Recently, I started photographing with movement. And I won a small grant last year. And as part of the grant, I have this exhibit at Creative Arts. Unfortunately, I had 5 lectures planned, and everything was pulled out from under me just as things were going so well. So hopefully we'll be able to reschedule the talks sometime in the future when life somewhat gets back to normal. We'll have to see when that is.
So Harold, about your exhibit, we have put that up on our website too. So for those of you that are interested, you can see his photos on our website. Harold, somebody else, Gale asked, when would you need a 70 megabyte, megabyte? Is it only if you need to blow up a small part of the photo? And somebody else piggybacks on that saying, it seems like it would take up a huge amount of computer space.
Yes, the second question first, it does take up an enormous amount of space on the computer, because if you take a detailed picture with a 70 megapixel camera, that picture will be even more than 70 megabytes. So it might be even 100 megabytes before you even process it. So that is a problem, but luckily, external hard drives and cloud backup are excellent choices for storing your pictures. So in terms of the sharpness, if you're going to make a really large picture, but even a smaller picture, when it's higher resolution, you can see the difference. Even if you're making like an 11 by 14, there is a difference to what you can do, because there's just so much data there that if the picture's sharp, it's going to look fantastic. So Astrid, it looks like our time is almost up.
Indeed. I have a quick poll that I'm going to put on the screen that I would love if everybody would take a moment to do. And while you all are doing that, I wanted to thank Harold for all his wisdom. And I am not a photographer, and I learned a tremendous amount tonight. So Harold, this is great. I'm trying to convince Harold and others of his photography department to do some more of these. Oh, shoot. My poll disappeared. So I'm going to, Harold, can you unshare your screen?
Yes. Can I say one more thing? So please check out my Facebook page and check out Crisis Creativity. And maybe in a future session, I'll share some of those pictures. So So friend me on Facebook, and I'd love for you to see Crisis Creativity and let me know what you think. I enjoyed seeing you all. Thank you so